All right, so on this week's episode of the Air with Brian Gregoire interview series, I had the pleasure of bringing on Jeff Parry, who is the Associate Director of Compliance for Notre Dame Athletics. We had a great conversation. Jeff is a real stand-up guy. We talked about how Jeff got into compliance, what exactly compliance is, and then we also touched on LinkedIn because Jeff is very involved on LinkedIn, especially with people my age, college students who are looking to get involved in the sports business after graduation. He constantly posts tips and advice pertaining to his journey of getting into the sports business and what he learned from it. And he also encourages us students to send him our resumes and cover letters so we can edit them. It's very unique, and I hope that venture continues to develop for Jeff. But for now, I hope you sit back and enjoy this conversation that him and I had. Thank you. All right, so welcome back to the Air with Brian Gregoire interview series. Today, I'm blessed to have the Associate Director of Compliance at Notre Dame, Jeff Parry, with me. I have a lot to get into get into with him here about compliance because a lot of people probably wondering what that is, and then his activity on LinkedIn and how he helps us young professionals out. We'll delve into that as well. But Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
Of course, happy to do it.
So the first question that I have for you is, what exactly is compliance for those who haven't heard of it before?
Yeah, so I guess probably how I would describe it is, basically just helping coaches and student athletes to be as successful as they can within these rules that are given, right?
Yeah.
Because their job is to coach, their job is to play and go to school, so they don't have time to you know memorize and parse out all the nuances of bylaws and those type of things, but that they have to adhere to them. So my job is to basically help them to be as successful as they can, go out and get the best re- recruits, go out and all that jazz, as long as they stay within the rules. So it's a lot of education, a lot of kind of taking things that are complicated or are written in a complicated way, and then kind of not dumbing down, but dumbing down, to say, hey, here's what this actually is in practice. So that's it in kind of a nutshell.
So you're essentially taking the weight off of their shoulders, helping them understand that compliance language as well, but you're essentially taking that weight off their shoulders so that
Sure.
it's one less thing that they have to focus on,
Right.
when they're also balancing school with athletics.
Exactly.
So what about compliance gravitated you toward it as a profession?
Well, I actually hadn't heard about it until I got into law school. And then I heard about it and I thought it was kind of boring and it would be a boring career. I thought, oh, let's just kind of talk about, the rules and that's it. But I thought I should, give it a shot. And so I thought, okay, I'll, give it a taste. And if I enjoy it, okay. If not, then I'm, no worse off. So I did it for my first summer of law school and I enjoyed it. And I thought if I enjoyed it as an unpaid intern, then I would enjoy it as a paid, job. Um, I think it was probably two things that I, that are why I stay, right, that kind of gravitate me towards it is one, you have a lot of opportunity to problem solve, right? So you get new challenges every day. A coach comes in and says, hey, here's this, crazy idea. How could we, get it to be within, the parameters? So that's, part of it. The other part of it is I have an opportunity to kind of touch all the different areas of the department and the campus, right? Because I'm involved with housing and textbooks and and we talked to the aid office, we talked to enrollment, right? Like we talked to all these different parties, and then in our own department, we talked to marketing, and we're talking to development and NIL and all that jazz. So I'm not sure that there's another position that you would have all those tentacles out and be able to talk to all these different parties. So I I like that aspect because you get to build relationships and you kind of have a over view of how things go, and then going back to the problems solving, right? That kind of keeps you going because it's a new challenge every day. So I'd say those two things are kind of what get me up in the morning.
Well, yeah, it's cool being able to see how more than just your department operates and having that kind of involvement in different facets of the athletic department. That's got to be really fulfilling. And sometimes you just find success by accident, right? You didn't go into law school with the ambition to get involved in compliance, but through self-discovery and through just keeping your mind and your eyes open, you're able to discover that opportunity. So that's really cool. That's really cool. And
Yeah.
one more compliance-based question here before we pivot into LinkedIn. How has your duties in the compliance office changed since NIL has been introduced?
Yeah, I wouldn't say too much has changed in terms of like, duties or, the nature of the job even. But it has added some complexity, right, to the job. Typically, changes in this area happen very methodically, right, and kind of over time. You can usually tell that they're about to happen, or it's been talked about and there's been a ground swell and okay, it's going to go into effect. But this just kind of dropped on us and it just kind of happened, right? Obviously, like we heard about it was a possibility, but in terms of like the actual practice and the education and the guidelines and the do's and the don'ts, right? Like there was no handbook. It was just kind of, hey, we're going to toss this on top of everything else. And so you have to kind of on the job training, how is that going to fit into all the other, all the other bylaws, how that's going to, change things. And so it's the same type of, deal, right? Like there's still the rules and the parameters, but now it's a case of okay, it's a brand new area that we've never ever dealt with. How do you kind of take that on the run? And that's been the biggest challenge is not that anything on our end from how we approach it changes, but in like how do you take just a brand new area and quickly become the experts at it. That's a big challenge.
Well,
So
especially when it was dropped on you as quickly as it was. I mean, there was no handbook. There was no timeline. It was just adapt on the fly. You couldn't train yourself for like 2 years for all of that complexity, all those adjustments. You kind of just had to do it on the fly. But I've seen that in institutions such as yours, like Notre Dame here at Alabama, and of course other schools like Georgia, Kentucky, Texas, A&M,
yep,
Ole Miss, they've adapted very quickly. Yeah, there's just great staffs in place to absorb that, and it's really been cool to see these athletic departments adapt to NIL. And granted, it hasn't been easy, but for a lot of places, it's looked like it's been very successful so far. Um,
sure.
Now shifting over to LinkedIn here, you've been an ambassador for students like me on LinkedIn since you post advice about breaking into the sports industry and then sustaining success within it. So you do that every day, and you've had some really interesting posts and. You also offer to look at our cover letters and resumes before we send them in for jobs, which you did that for me, and I really appreciate it. It's made my cover letter look a lot better. What exactly inspires you to do that? Like how that idea dawned on you?
Um, I think it was just kind of a realization that I was what, 2, 3, 4 years ago, I was in a situation that I didn't have, you know, any knowledge of how to do those type of things, right? Like how to network, how to, job interview, et cetera. And so it was kind of a process where I had to teach how that was going to, happen. And so then I kind of stopped and looked, back and said, oh, I've, trained and gained um, those habits or that knowledge. And so I could add that, value to others. So I thought, well, I might as well, do that and start adding that, value. Um, Obviously, down the road, it would be great to, to monetize that or whatever. But at this point, just, trying to help those who are kind of, where I was, half a decade ago, helping them to kind of get those same type of, gains and those same type of uh, wins that I didn't, have at that time. So,
Well, it's just your form of paying it forward.
right.
And and that
Yeah.
that, that that's awesome. You know how you found success in the sport industry. You're taking what you learned and you're reinvesting that thing back into the community. So that's awesome, and we all really appreciate it. And there always is. I mean, you never know when there's going to be space for you to monetize it. That day could come, and I hope that comes for you. I really could. I've seen you get great traction with your posts, so I think that day could come for you, Jeff. Now, what one last question here to end the interview off. When it comes to your advice to students, I want to hear what your thoughts are on this. How do you recommend students tell their story in an interview?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's probably, the key, right? Is that's how you will get jobs. Um, Probably two things. I think one is you have to know your story, right? Before you can tell it. And so that, that could be just, over, the course of time, you kind of, gather those and say, okay, here's, what I'm about. Maybe you take a day or two off and, go on a hike and just kind of, ponder on who you are and kind of what made you and all that jazz. However, you have to come to know who you are, right? And that could be over time, or it can be just kind of in one, session. And then the second part of that, right, is how do you articulate that story so that it matches the particular job or the particular, role that you're trying, to go and get. And that's where, the interview prep is more about, not that you're, trying to, have a script or like have okay, here's how I'm gonna, act and, get this job, but how do I tailor my story so it makes the most sense in this context, right? I kind of give the analogy of you're around a campfire, telling a story. If you told the story 1,000 times, then you're not concentrating on the story, you're concentrating on who you're telling it to, right? So you would tell the story, differently if you're there with you know, girl or boyfriend as opposed to like your, buddies or your, parents or whatever, right? And you can kind of, tailor and articulate different aspects of your story, based on, the time of day, if you have wars or not, right? If they're engaged, if it's scary, so that's just, to point out that if you know your story and you know what you're all about, then when those, job opportunities come, all you've got to do is spend your time on, okay, how does this go into this particular context? And that's, that's how you get jobs. So
So it's all like a process. There's self-discovery and then molding the stories that fit your position, and then being able to articulate yourself well enough so that your communication matches that of the interviewer and you connect with them. And that's essentially
Yeah,
how you land them jobs.
yeah. No, I mean, and that's not. I mean, that that might come across as oversimplified. So like, obviously, there's details involved in that.
Oh, for
But
sure.
generally though, right? Like, you know, it's ongoing, right? You don't just say, okay, I know who I am at this age, and that's it, right? Like, it's ongoing discovery, it's ongoing, that type of thing. But then it all depends on what the job is, who you're talking to, like how do you best convey why you are the only person in the world that they ought to hire at this time. And that just goes back to who you are, what you do, and what your story is. And that's, I mean, that's just the bare bones of how you get to that point, I think,
That
at least.
that that that's a good point too. It's ever changing, your story's ever evolving, and it's got to
Right,
be incorporated into that story.
for sure. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for coming on. This was excellent. I really appreciate it. You gave us some great insight, and it was awesome hearing your story about how you got into compliance and then started your, I would even say LinkedIn channel as you're just giving us content all the time. So
Yeah.
thank you for that, Jeff.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to do it. I'm happy you had me on. Always, here to help. If anyone else, has, hopes of, getting into the industry, they can contact me on LinkedIn, and I'll be there. So
There's your man right there, Jeff Parry. Jeff Parry. Have a great day, Jeff.
thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate you and the time that you took out of your day to watch the video. And if you enjoyed it, please be sure to like the video and share it, as well as subscribe to the Era. The more likes and subscribers I get on this channel, the more resources I can attain, and the more resources I can attain, the more value I can provide to you, the viewer. And that is how I show my appreciation for you for the time that you devote to watching my videos. So thank you so much, and have a great day.